Now, as you may have read in the newspapers, Sharon Edwards was given a life sentence yesterday with a minimum of 20 years for murdering her husband, David Edwards, in what was described as a tragic case of domestic abuse. It's been revealed that Mr. Edwards had endured months of violence at the hands of his wife, culminating in the fatal stabbing when he lost his job as a solicitor. It was also revealed that she had previous convictions for assaulting other partners. Well, we know that domestic violence is most commonly committed against women, but how frequently does it happen to men? Why would a man like Mr. Edwards not come forward and seek help? And what should be in place for both men and women to end violence in the home? Well, Mark Brooks is Chair of Trustees for Mankind, the national helpline for male victims. Marianne Hester is Professor of Gender Violence and International Policy at Bristol University and joins us from Bristol. Marianne, I think it's still accepted that 2 women a week die at the hands of a male partner or former partner. How common are extreme cases such as this one where a man is murdered by his female partner?
It's a very, very unusual case, but one of the things that stands out, of course, is that she was using a knife. She used a knife, and one of the things that we see in cases of women using violence is that they are more likely to use a weapon like a knife, but that's maybe because they often aren't as strong as men, and it tends to be that women use weapons in situations where they're protecting themselves and their children rather than as the instigator of or the primary aggressor in the situation. So that is the thing about the Edwards case that's, it sort of fits, but very often where women are the ones who are being violent to men, they'll also ring the police, or if they've damaged the man, caused injury to the man, they'll ring the police and say, I've stabbed him, I've done it, I've done something, which again she didn't do, and also, it's very, very unusual for women to be very violent in this way, but the things are also very different to male perpetrators. The issues of what we call intimate terrorism, that's the really extreme violence we often see that women experience, where they live in a lot of fear, where they're very controlled.
Well, this man lived in a lot of fear. I mean, Mark, it's become very clear that the abuse went on for some time. Why, Mark, do you suppose Mr. Edwards didn't seek any help?
Well, that is a real issue, and just to clarify, 19 men a year are killed by a partner or ex-partner, and they're from the Office for National Statistics. So just to put that into context, I think what happens in a situation like this is very similar to the situation that female victims face. They're cut off from their friends and family, they're weakened psychologically and emotionally, and therefore they feel unable to actually escape. There is also issues around the fact that he did tell people that he was a victim, and one of the key things we need to address is actually making sure that whether you're a female victim or a male victim, if you disclose to friends or family, then they really need to step up to the plate in some respects as much as they can. But it's often around love. There's no children in this situation, but also men feel that marriage is for life, it's love, and they feel that they can change their abuser.
We heard that he went into the office with black eyes, with scratches, with bite marks, which were commented on, obviously, by his colleagues. What sort of stories, Mark, do you hear on the helpline about the sort of violence that men have endured?
Well, we get stories ranging from that type of violence through to more psychological and emotional control, and what we find is that in a domestic abuse relationship, it's often the psychological and the emotional control that comes first, and then when a victim tries to escape, the abuse escalates to violence in terms of the abuser then trying to reassert control. And one that always sticks out in my mind is that we had a man who was continually woken up throughout the night every single hour by a radio being put up to his ear and turned up to 10 to wake him up. So he was psychologically controlled through sleep deprivation. So there's a full range.
Marianne, what do we know about the type of woman who perpetrates this kind of violence?
Well, what do we know about these women? I mean, we don't know enormous amounts about her background. I think, again, I'd say it's relatively unusual because women tend to be positioned differently in relationships in our society, and even where women are using violence, often we find that there's more violence and abuse ongoing from the men against them. So again, in this situation, it's much more unusual. So we do get situations where the couples are both using quite a lot of violence, but where the direction still tends to be from the man.
But as Mark said, 19 men a year die as the result of their
absolutely,
partner or their former partner.
Absolutely, and as I was saying earlier, that where women are using weapons in particular, women may end up actually inflicting very high levels of harm because of using weapons, but it's often in a position where they are having to protect themselves or their children. So it's not as often instigators. We did some research recently where we've looked, surveyed men in GP surgeries, and of course both women and men will go to the GP if they have problems, and that includes men who have issues in relationships. And we found that 1 in 5 of the men actually in that situation were talking about some sort of negative behaviour going on in their relationship, either that they were experiencing and or using. But 1%, so 1 in 100, were experiencing perhaps that high level of what you might call more the intimate terrorism type. I mean, high levels of impact and so on. So there is a very small proportion of men who also go to the GP who actually do have that kind of experience. And at the same time, we found that some of them were also talking about perpetrating. So more of them were talking about perpetrating. But GPs is one of the areas where these issues should also be picked up, because it's to be able to stop these things before they become lethal is clearly absolutely crucial, but also to deal with issues of where there's...
Marianne, let me put a point to Mark.
At a low level.
We do know that women often don't leave because they have children and they don't have any money. Why would a man with a good job simply not walk away?
I think for a man in a good job, and in fact in any job, and we get bankers and GPs, etc., calling us, is around that they feel a sense of shame, they feel embarrassed, they feel that they won't be believed, and it really undermines their own sense of what it is to be a man, strong, providing security around the family and in society. So it undermines their identity, and they fear that they won't be believed. And one of the things that we find on our helpline is we're seeing increasing numbers of mothers and sisters and daughters and female friends coming to us because the man won't pick up the phone, and they're taking it upon themselves to try and get help. Men tend to speak to women more about these issues than they do fellow men.
How do you propose changing that attitude so that if a man is suffering like this, he does something about it?
I think the key thing for us is to make sure that society generally, friends, family, work colleagues, feel they have the same responsibility that they have to supporting a male in that situation than they rightly would a female. And we need far more awareness campaigns from people like police and the councils.
Mark Brooks and Professor Marianne Hester, thank you both very much indeed. And on Monday we'll be discussing domestic violence again as portrayed in a BBC One documentary which is going to be shown on the 14th of March. So you can hear that on Monday.